To our fourth New Possible City Pandemic series, and even more delighted to introduce my colleague and a faculty member in the City Planning and Urban Affairs program, Dr. Yesim Sungu. And often data and technology and all these things are associated with people who are computer nerds or who are essentially technologists by training. Dr. Sungu brings this amazing set of interests in sustainability, both from an economic as well as an environmental and social point of view, and at the same time tries to use technology and understand how data can actually make impact within this focus. So without further ado, I want to introduce and welcome Dr. Yesim Sungu. She teaches many courses in the City Planning and Urban Affairs program, and she really brings a wide variety of interests, but more importantly, has the discipline of analytical research, if you will, that she brings to issues such as looking at systemic inequities, economics, etc. So Dr. Sungu, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Dr. Data Kaler, and thank you all for joining us today. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. And I just want to start by saying that I hope you and your family are safe and healthy and have been hopefully having a good summer despite these unusual times. So as Madhu mentioned, today's webinar is about cities and data. And what I thought I should do to start with this equation. Okay, I'm just kidding. I'm not going to start with this equation, but everybody usually thinks if data is involved, most people think it's only about numbers and equations. Yes, numbers and equations are important. They are essential, but there's more to consider when we, especially urban planners, policymakers, and community development professionals, work with data to inform our decision-making process. So what actually I'm going to do, so I decided to frame my presentation around these 4 questions. So we're going to try to answer this to some extent. I have only 15-20 minutes, so we don't have enough time, but hopefully we will answer to some extent. And so the 4 questions are, so the first one is, for our field, urban planning and policy, we have entered a period of intense fascination with data. And my first question is whether this is really new. And the second is, okay, well, we have how much data is out there and what kinds of data is available for urban planning and policy. And the third question is, okay, data is essential, it's an important asset, but I will also argue that context is important. It is as important as the data itself, and the question is why. And the fourth and the last question is, what do we do with data? I'll give you some simple examples. So let's start with the first one, the fascination with data for urban planning, whether it's new or not. As I said, so we have entered this new period of intense fascination with data, but the importance of data in urban planning is not really new. We're just lucky I should say in the United States, because even now in some countries, not so much data is available, but we have lots of data available today for us compared to 2000s, compared to 1990s. But what I'm going to do, actually, I'm going to go back really to 1800s to answer this question, whether the fascination with data for urban planning, whether it's new or not. So what I'd like to use is a couple of historical examples. So the first one is Charles Booth's inquiry into life in London. So Charles Booth, he was a social researcher. He was profoundly concerned by social problems in London in the 19th century. And without any commission other than his own, he created, funded, and fielded one of the most comprehensive social surveys about poverty in London. So it was an extensive survey. By the way, it took over like 15 years to publish the results in 17 volumes. And what he did, as I said, he was concerned about poverty, and he classified poverty by using 7 categories. And he color coded, like he basically walked the streets of London, and he color coded the houses and the blocks. And some of these classifications are really interesting, as you can see. But this one of his important contribution is the poverty line. For him, poor 18 to 20s, weak for a moderate family, that was the poverty line. Anything below, he considered very poor. And look at this, the first category, lowest class, and he labeled this like as vicious and semi-criminal, which is kind of interesting. So his study was important. I mean, it is, as you can see, it is very data driven. So he involved in campaigns for old age pensions and also promoting some labor policies. So here is a data driven example. So here's another one, Florence Kelly. She was influenced by Charles Booth's study. So she did something similar in Chicago. Florence Kelly was an applied researcher, a women's rights activist, a child labor law advocate, and apparently she also helped form the NAACP in 1909. And in 1893, she also used intense data collection. She involved in intense data collection efforts to identify poverty in Chicago. She interviewed all of the residents in this one area in Chicago near this Hull, it's called Hull House, to determine whether they lived in tenements, rented rooms, or they owned their own homes. So her work was really important, and they are even highly regarded today, her work, in terms of the minimum wage, 8-hour work days, and children's rights issues. So again, this was very much data driven. And the third one, so if you attended our previous webinar, Dr. Kaler and Dr. O'Connell actually talked about this case, John Snow's cholera study. So just to kind of recap, in 1854, a cholera outbreak hit Soho, London. Over 120 people died from the disease in 3 days. And the common belief at that time was that cholera was an airborne disease. Physician John Snow had a different theory, but he needed to find data to support his theory, right? And his theory was that cholera didn't circulate through air. And Dr. Snow collected and mapped the locations of water pumps, as well as the number of cholera deaths. And what he recorded, especially in one pump here on Broad Street, he identified this high number of cholera deaths, and then he suggested that the contaminated pump in Broad Street be removed. So again, here's another data-driven study, and again, these happen in 1800s. So now let's fast forward. As I said before, we have so much data today. And how much data is out there? Well, nobody knows. I mean, it's kind of hard to count, right? But it was nicely put by the chief economist of Google. So I'm going to read this. He says, between the dawn of civilization and 2003, we only created 5 exabytes of information. Now we're creating that amount every 2 days. Well, you might be wondering what exabyte is. I don't know either. Well, I know it mathematically, 10 to the power of 18, but I still cannot really get my head around it. I'm still currently at terabytes. I have a 1 terabyte data storage unit, but And I thought when I first bought it, I will never be able to actually fill this storage unit, but now it's almost full. So I'm hopefully getting, you know, like understanding that what exabyte is. But again, the idea here is like the volume of data is expected to grow each year. And partially it is because of the, so we have this increasingly connected world and information and communication technologies. So not only humans or business entities now creating data, but also machines are creating data. So, um, so now let's talk about this second part of this question. What kind of data is out there for us for urban planning and policy? Well, so for us, data can take many forms. As I started at the beginning of my presentation, it's not only numbers. We can use text, we can use symbols, we can use images, and we can even use sounds. So we urban planners and policymakers or community leaders, we can be really creative about different data forms that we can use for decision-making process. And also, I want to talk about like at least how do we capture these different kinds of or forms of data. So I'm going to talk about three basic really ways to capture data, because currently those are the ones that we use. So I'm going to start with the data captured directly like through surveys or records, and one of them is the Census Bureau has lots of data available for us. And I use this. I use their data tools and data sets in my classes, by the way, and um, and uh, and we planners use census data all the time. So in case, as you know, this 2020 census is happening now, and if you haven't done so, please respond it today, because it is very important for us. So these, the data through the Census Bureau, by the way, these are derived data. It's already processed. For example, they calculated the poverty rate in a neighborhood or in a census tract, so which is extremely useful for us. So another sets of like how data is captured is through, again, through records and through some apps, uh, and uh, and through open data portals. Well, American cities, I mean, not all of them, but I think in 2018 there were about like 90 of them, which has open data portals. Um, they make it easier for the public to obtain information about government activity, and Boston has one. And again, we use this in my classes heavily. And if you go and check Analyze Boston, lots of data sets available. And some of those data sets are produced by us residents. And I don't know if any of you have used 311 app. I use it all the time. Actually, as a matter of fact, I report all kinds of non-emergency service issues whenever I run into like potholes or maybe rat sightings. And so these are also, as I said, these are also captured through records or apps. So, and the third way to produce data is by the information and communication technologies, or we call it ICTs. And so digital and mobile devices, social media, and the Internet of Things really produce lots of data, and and um, and some of them are not really publicly available. I mean, data on these platforms, some of them are a commodity. We have to buy it, as opposed to the other ones like, you know, the Census Bureau data or the open data portals. Those are freely available. But the point here is, so data has rapidly become a critical asset here. Now we see the shift really at organizations. Before, maybe in end of 1990s, we thought, oh, it's nice to have this data set, but now the shift is, oh, it's essential. We have to have that data, right? So that's the new viewpoint. And also, data is now everyone's responsibility. There is no escape. So here is the picture of Marty Walsh, the mayor of Boston. his office has a dashboard, a large screen packed with like constantly changing text, numbers, and charts, as you can see here. And a chart is tracking all kinds of information, like, as I said, the number of potholes maybe filled every day. And by the way, the pothole that I reported, it was filled the next morning. And the central piece of information here is the city score right here. It's the dashboard Boston created, I think back in 2016 maybe. And the goal here is to indicate Boston's overall health. And it combines 24 different metrics, from crime to Wi-Fi availability, energy consumption, and even like grants for the arts. So I kind of wonder, like whether they included some other health metrics on their dashboard. So it's something to explore. So I know some of our current students or graduates actually are on Zoom today. I mean, as a future urban planner or a current planner, I'm just going to say, like, be ready to immerse in data and be expected to use them regularly. And by the way, you don't need to have the words like data or analyst or data scientist in your job title, because a sharp data analyst can miss something in the data, but the trained eyes of a city planner who understand the context much better can easily spot the issue with data. So what I'm trying to say, really, the Achilles heel of any data analyst is a lack of context. So something city planners and policymakers and community leaders and residents have in really spades. So which will kind of segue kind of nicely to my other question. So why context is really important? I'm going to use an example to elaborate on my point. So you have likely heard the statistic that over half of the world's population now lives in urban areas. And this statement has been the standard opening line of reports and presentations about urbanization since this milestone was supposedly reached 2008 right here. And as you see from this chart, I don't have anything before 1950. It starts after 1950. The reason why, because the data is not reliable. We had like 2 wars and a pandemic, and some other factors really made it difficult to count people. But in any case, so the question here is, okay, well, over the half of the population now lives in urban areas, but what does really urban mean, right? So what I want to do, actually, let's do a quick poll. And if you took my courses before, you know the answer, but I still want you to participate in this poll.
Happy to.
So the question here is, it's a true-false question. There's a common global definition of urban so that we can study it. Is this true or false?
Not to give too much away, but the definition of urban is like the definition of sustainability.
Yeah. So I'm gonna wait maybe like another 30 seconds.
Please.
I think we have 23 people on the call, and I have 16 people already answered. Okay.
It's anonymous, right? The poll?
Correct.
Yes.
Okay. So I'm gonna end the poll and let me share the results. Can you see the results?
Yes.
Okay. So 18% says true. Yes, there's a common global definition of urban, so we can study and measure it. And 82% said it's false. Well, the statement is false, right? We don't have a common definition of urban. And so let me give you some examples. Um, well, here we have 4 countries. The common thing about these 4 countries, they all use population to define urban. But then that's all. If you look at the number of people they use to define urban, it really differs. Like in Venezuela, it's 2,500. In Italy, it's 10,000. And in Ethiopia, it is 2,000. And in Ghana, it's 5,000. I included Ghana because our next webinar is about urbanization in Ghana and in Africa. So I thought it's good to kind of know. And if you look at like uh, 5 more other countries, so these countries, they don't only use population, but some additional factors. Like in Canada, well, 1,000 people and population density. 400 population density is considered urban. Iceland is one of my favorite, and actually I emailed their statistics office just to make sure that this is correct. So apparently localities of 200 or more is considered urban, and plus the distance between those residents, it has to be less than 200 meters apart. In Botswana, well, again, they use population, they have a population threshold, which is 5,000. But then they added another important criteria here is, criteria, which is 75% of the economic activity has to be non-agricultural. And then Japan is similar, but look at the population threshold here, 50,000. And 60 or more of the houses, they have to be in the main built-up areas. And 60% of the population, they have to be engaged in manufacturing, trade, or some other urban type businesses. And Malaysia, I think that's also an interesting one. 10,000 or more, 60% engaged in non-agricultural activities, and areas with modern toilet facilities in their housing units. It is considered urban. So now going back to this question, why context is important, because this urban, this 50% of the population now is urban, actually it is basically calculated on 193 different definitions of urban. So as an urban planner or a policymaker, we have to know the context when we work with data. And data, by the way, is willing to yield up insights to whomever, and that person just needs to be diligent and curious enough to find those insights. And the important thing here is data. Keep in mind that data is socially constructed, as the example in Charles Booth's map. So he kind of used this like kind of politically incorrect now, but like vicious and semi-criminal as the lowest class. And data can be also ideologically loaded. And as I said, it can be, I mean, it's a public good in some cases, like we have open data portals, or the US Census provides all kinds of data, but also it's a commodity to be traded. So some of these ICT data is not available for us easily. And data is a product of social technical system. So we have to keep that in mind. And now my 4th question, I'm over like 3 minutes of my time, but so what do we do with data? So I'm going to start with this smart city concept. And I'm not going to go into the details, but especially these ICT solutions, they are heavily and interestingly used in different areas, like in energy management systems, traffic control systems, smart grids, or urban data platforms. Like one of the urban data platform, as I showed the city score in Boston. But the question, I mean, the goal here is, the end goal is not to create a smart city, right? The end goal is, how do we really use data to improve people's life? So we can use like these fancy technology like ICT solutions, or even with one data point, we can create interesting and important stories. So this is just one map from one of my studies. I look at mortgage lending landscape in Boston almost every year. I track this information, and what you see here is like one dot shows one mortgage application. When I say one application, I'm talking about, it doesn't matter whether it is originated or denied. I'm interested in who is really applying. And I, of course, looked at others as well, but I think this is such an interesting map. So that's why, and it kind of tells a very interesting story. So one dot shows one mortgage application, and it's color coded. So for example, blue is one mortgage application by African American or Black householder, and red is mortgage application by Hispanic or Latinx householder, and green is Asian householder. And I don't have white here because it really like it takes over the whole map. So I don't really need to map the white mortgage applications. But what is interesting here is the conclusion is Boston is right here. If you are not sure where we are, so Boston is here. So Boston is one of the limited number of cities where Black or African Americans apply for home purchase loans. So, and the next question is why, right? So this data reveals an interesting question to explore some more. And so I want to go back to my first slide. As I said, I'm going to start with this equation, but I was joking, but maybe some of you were wondering what this equation is about. So I'm going to actually, let me show you another version of this equation in words. So what that equation is really doing is kind of taking this and making it available for us so that we can see if near things are influencing each other. So this is the first law of geography. Everything is related to everything else, but near things are more related than distant things. Again, the goal here is to find out if neighbors are kind of influencing each other. And let me show you another picture of that equation and this law. So what I did, I took the COVID-19 cases, number of cases, and I applied that equation. That's an analytical tool, by the way. So what you see is the pink areas are the hot spots. Those are hot groups of towns and cities significantly affected by the virus. It is the collection of towns and cities with a relatively high number of cases, and also they are surrounded by areas of high number of cases. So we know that Chelsea is a hotspot, right? But the question here is, how about the neighboring towns and cities, right? So we see a really like hotspot right here. And then what else we see with that analytical tool? We see also outliers, like right here in the middle of this, in the middle of Massachusetts, we have a high number of cases, not really surrounded by other high cases. So that would be kind of interesting to look at from a health perspective, whether it is something to kind of contain in that area, or maybe here is another town, but all around it, it's low or cold spots, but here we have another hotspot. So this is a very versatile tool, by the way, this analytical tool. So since the elections are coming, I thought I should also use it for the data 2016 presidential election data. So the same idea, the same tool, same analytical tool. Pink areas shows the clusters that have a high percentage of votes for the Republican Party. So again, this is at the county level, by the way. So these are those high group of counties. And then you can see the outliers, like, well, mostly maybe Democratic. They voted for Democratic, but then we see a kind of hot spot in the middle of cold spot. Okay, so this is just one of the tools that you will learn in my class, Citizen Analytics, Making Sense of Data. It's really what you will learn in that class, really to make sense of data. And you will learn how to interview the data sets that you're working for, understanding the context, and also apply these techniques. It's on Mondays. 6 to 8:45, and if you have any questions, please let me know. But just one last thing that I want to say, there are some prerequisites. Actually, there are two prerequisites for this class. You just have to be passionate about urban planning and policy problems. And the second most important one is you have to have an open and curious mind to learn about data and basic analytics. I think with that, I will turn it over to Madhu.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Sungu. That was fantastic. I almost feel like I want to take your class now, so I'm sure everybody else feels the same way. So without further ado, I wanted to open up the forum for questioning, because I'm sure that many of you have many related and unrelated questions around these issues.
I have a question, if I may. This is William Kaler. One theme that runs through your talk, Professor, is sort of the reliance on the quality of data. So can you talk a little bit to how we make sure we get good data and are asking the right questions of it?
So most of the time, you will not get good data. So what you need to do really interview the data, or some people say interrogate the data, so that you can find out if there are issues, whether your data clean or not. And 70% of your time will really go to that purpose, like you will be interviewing your data. And there are some techniques, again, we use to do that interview or interrogation, I should say. And the question is sometimes I see a disconnect between research questions and data. So that's really important, right? We should have, we should match the right question with the right data. And the question is whether the data should drive the research questions or research questions should drive the data. Well, well, either way is fine, by the way. I know there's a kind of debate about that, but sometimes I have a research question and there's no data available, and I start collecting my own data. But then I get a data set and I start playing with the data, and then I end up with questions like like one of them is the mortgage lending data that I showed you. After looking at or creating this map, the next question is, why do we have that geographic pattern here? And that will require additional data collection, by the way, which will be mostly qualitative, most probably. Hopefully I answered your question.
Very much. Thank you very much. Very much.
So, Yesim, go ahead, Jim. I think you have a question.
Yesim, could you just give us kind of a sense of what the different classes would be? You don't have to go through 14 weeks, but just, what are the main topics that you would be covering in your course?
Mm-hmm. Sure. So in the first part, we are gonna really learn about how to understand how to interview data. And then also we are gonna talk about some data applications of data in city policies. And then after that, mostly we're gonna cover lots of analytical tools to learn insights from data.
So, Jim, is there anybody else? I want to give others a chance.
Yeah, this is Tiana. I have a question.
Andrea,
So,
yes, go ahead.
So I know you've taught the GIS course in the past too, which tends to get into multiple data sets and overlapping and analyzing that way. Is this, just for clarification, is this more looking at single sets of data, not integrating multiple sets of data and looking at relationships?
Oh, we always integrate lots of data set together. Yeah, not only in my GIS class, but in this class also. Yeah, we have to integrate several data sets to get insights, right?
Dr. Sungu, we have a question in the chat from Matt. He says, how do we know if we are looking at data through the correct lens and context? Sometimes it can be hard to tell if we are being objective in the moment.
Oh, well, you won't be objective. We cannot be objective. We are social scientists. And Matt, I think you're taking my urban research methods class and we're going to talk about that. No, all of us comes with a lens and we're not aware of it. But hopefully through our program with all the courses you will take, actually you will learn what your lens is. You will be aware of your own lens.
And what you're saying actually in terms of context, in terms of these biases are very much, I don't know, it connects with what I teach in the history theory and planning practice. So that dovetails very well. So Yesim, you identify more as a data scientist than perhaps I do. And you know, this is both a question and a concern. Of late, I want to say, as you have shown, that the amount of data that we are generating has increased, the types of data, and then having ICTs and things like that are, you know, things that we are getting seduced by. And there seems to be a perceptible shift in the social scientific literature where because this data is available and because there are methodologies to analyze this data and look at it in so many ways, often the goal of the data analysis gets subsumed by the nature and type of data we are able to bring in. And that does two things. One is, I think you spoke earlier about data being socially constructed. And the other thing is that, do you think that as data takes on more and more of a larger form within our practice, do you think we are going to get far away from being able to communicate real things with people, you know, which matters on a day-to-day? So it's both philosophical and sort of, you know, where the trend of the field is going. And if so, what are the other counter trends, perhaps?
So I think it can happen if so this is my bias, if data scientists really take over. That's why I was trying to make my point, like as a future urban planner or a current urban planner, we have to be immersed in data and be expected to use them regularly. And if the person, like if the person who's using the data is not city planner but a computer scientist, then unfortunately we will have that that gap. But I think every profession is really they know their context better, so that's why they have to be really skilled in these analytical tools, so that so we can communicate it also properly. Hopefully that answers your question, Madhu.
Yes, yes. I think, you know, I think what you're saying is that we really need to understand both the methodologies and the way data is used to be really able to advocate our stances for what matters in our practice. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I mean, we cannot really leave it to like data scientists or computer scientists.
Yes, yes, I understand. Great. Thank you.
One more question, if I may, Professor Sungu. Where do you see the real opportunities for research moving forward in terms of applying data to urban problems? Where are the gaps, in other words, right now?
Oh, that is like, oh, well, well, I cannot really answer it, but I can give you some examples, maybe like disparity research one. But disparities in housing, transportation, there's still lots of gap. Um, 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 and also disparities research, like the data how it is measured sometimes may not be useful. So I think we have to come up with different operationalizations or classifications so that we can really get to that disparity problem. I mean, that's the area that I'm really kind of, I have research on disparities in different areas. That's why I know, but I'm sure, you know, when we had the transportation, I think Professor Reagan and Professor Hessel, they talked about like the gap in transportation as well, how data can be used to fill that gap.
Thank you.
Great. We'll give the audience a few minutes if anybody has other questions.
Hi, this is Jason, Alston Brighton CDC. How you doing, Yesim?
Hi, Jason. How are you?
Good.
Hello, Jason.
So I have a question regarding census in the upcoming 2020 census. We all know that there are some challenges with getting an accurate count.
Yeah.
For multiple reasons. How do you foresee maybe some challenges with doing research based on data with 2020 numbers?
Yeah, I'm just gonna wait and see. I'm still hopeful. Yeah, you know, yeah, I don't know, but that's a question that I ask my colleagues at the Census Bureau, and I invite actually two of them usually to my classes. So yeah, I don't know the answer. But Jason, since now you're on the call, can I maybe put you on the spot? And so talking about data and its application, we did one very kind of a work with, we did a work with Jason. I don't know if you maybe want to talk about that, how data, that analysis was useful for Austin Brighton.
Sure. So we have partnered on a few different projects with students. I think the first round of students took a look at mapping out neighborhood incomes in Alston Brighton with areas that are seeing major development projects. And so our development project matching the income of neighborhood residents. The results from that are no, obviously. You know, Alston Brighton, much like the rest of the city, is more in line with Boston's median income than the entire area for area median income. And so a lot of the units that are coming in are slightly higher than market rate rents, but a majority of residents in the community and the city of Boston can't afford market rate rents in these development projects. And so that was kind of the first research project. And then another student around the same time mapped out all of the development projects that are happening, that were happening at the time in Alston Brighton. The most recent data analysis research project that was done was looking at, you know, what is the mismatch between residential development, specifically what is the mismatch between residential development and residents' incomes in the neighborhood mapped out by area income levels. And so we can see a mismatch. So if you have a majority, you can see on the scale, a a majority of residential units are being developed for, I think, households making $125,000 or more a year. And I think it was like around 9% of housing units is actually being built for residents who earn basically, I think, zero all the way up to $50,000 a year. And so it was really interesting to see on paper or in digital form on a scale, you know, what that mismatch really looks like.
Thank you, Jason.
Thank you, Jason. Welcome. For the audience who doesn't know, would you please introduce yourself once?
Yeah, I swear this isn't a plug.
No, not at all. We don't believe in those things. Please go ahead.
So, my name is Yesim Sungu-Eryilmaz. I'm the manager of community building and engagement at the Allston Brighton CDC, a nonprofit housing developer in the community. My work is largely centered around leadership development, community planning, policy advocacy, civic engagement, and kind of like special buckets, which is the Jason will do it line of work, which there's an ever-growing listing of that. But we're really focused on making sure that low to moderate income communities of color, non-native English speakers, and immigrants have access to resources, services, and housing in the community.
And I think we will continue to collaborate maybe with some other projects, right, Jason? Hopefully.
That is the hope.
Great. Any other last questions of the audience? Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Sungu, for your very enlightening lecture. And I just wanted to say that next Wednesday, we have our final webinar series for the New Possible. And we are going to have two very esteemed speakers. One is the US ambassador, the Ghanaian ambassador, no, the US ambassador from Ghana, and his name is Dr. Barfour Ajay Barua. So you will meet the ambassador himself, as well as one of our faculty members who also works for the EPA and recently has become very much a mover and shaker in the Ghanaian sustainability areas. So, and that is Dr. Kwabena K. Aboyage. I'm sorry if I am murdering those names, but regardless, I have heard the ambassador speak before. He's an eloquent speaker. They are doing some extraordinary work in Africa and particularly in Ghana to make sure that the urbanization is done the right way. And for those of you who don't know, the free trade agreement was just instituted in Africa, I believe, 3 days ago. So this is a great time for the continent to be able to share their technologies, their work, their goods, as well as Ghana, for Ghana to become one of the champions and leaders. So we will be hearing from them about what all has been going on in a very big part of the world, which really is very, very integral to all the things that happen in the US, in the developing world, and so on. So we look forward to you joining us if you can. And thank you again. And please don't hesitate to send us any questions. And I know that Andrea has posted some stuff as to where you can get the lecture slides and so on. Andrea, any last things? Take it away.
No, if anybody wants to see this recording or if you missed any of our previous events, you can find them all on the event webpage, the recordings and the lecture slides. And we hope to see you next Wednesday at 6 o'clock.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a great evening.
Thank you, Dr. Sungu.